High above the glittering skyline of New York City, Nathan Sterling lounged in a leather armchair, a glass of aged whiskey in his hand. From the top floor of his luxury penthouse, he looked down at the city below, small, insignificant, just like most people in his eyes. 38. Nathan was the CEO of Sterling Capital, a self-made billionaire, and one of the most powerful men in high finance. He had everything: wealth, influence, and the ability to control any situation, or so he thought. Tonight, he was hosting one of his infamous private parties, an exclusive event where New York's elite gathered to drink the finest champagne, flaunt their wealth, and discuss business deals worth millions. The air buzzed with laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. The men were polished, the women draped in designer gowns, and the conversations were as predictable as ever. Nathan moved through the crowd with effortless charm, exchanging handshakes and calculated smiles. Then came Marcus Hale. Unlike the other guests, Marcus wasn't there to impress. He was there to challenge. A fellow billionaire and longtime rival of Nathan's, Marcus had built his empire in real estate and was just as arrogant as Nathan. But where Nathan prided himself on control, Marcus thrived on chaos, still playing it safe. Nathan? Marcus smirked, swirling the wine in his glass as he leaned against the marble bar. Same crowd, same routine. Don't you ever get tired of winning the same way? Nathan raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Why fix what isn't broken? Marcus chuckled, his expression turning sly. That's the thing, you've built an empire, but you've also built walls so high that nothing ever surprises you anymore. You control everything. But what happens when you step outside of your world? When you're in a situation where money, power, and reputation mean nothing? Nathan took a slow sip of his whiskey, intrigued but wary. Sounds like you have something in mind. I do, Marcus said, lowering his voice slightly. Let's make a bet. Nathan smirked. He was always up for a challenge. What kind of bet? Marcus gestured toward the glamorous crowd in the room. We both know your type: young, flawless, high class, women who fit seamlessly into this world. But what if you had to marry someone who was the complete opposite? Someone who doesn't care about money, who doesn't fit into your world at all? Nathan raised an eyebrow. And what's in it for me? If you succeed, if you can marry this woman and stay with her for 6 months without walking away, I'll personally invest $50 million into Sterling Capital. No conditions. No strings attached. Marcus grinned. But if you fail, well, let's just say your reputation as the man who never loses will take a serious hit. The room around them faded into background noise as Nathan processed the challenge. A game. A test of his ability to manipulate any situation to his advantage. 6 months? Easy. You're on, Nathan said, smirking. Marcus's grin widened. Perfect. Let's see if the great Nathan Sterling can handle a challenge he can't buy his way out of. And just like that, the game had begun. What Nathan didn't know was that this bet wouldn't just challenge his control. It would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. Nathan Sterling was a man who never lost. The bet wasn't just about winning, it was about proving that no situation, no person, was beyond his control. And so, within hours of shaking hands with Marcus, he set his team into motion. His assistant, Emma, discreetly compiled a list of potential candidates, women who were far removed from the world of wealth and power. Nathan flipped through the profiles with mild curiosity. Each name and face nothing more than another business transaction. Then he saw her, Elena Brooks, 35, a former teacher turned social worker, founder of Hope Haven, a nonprofit that provided housing, education, and resources for struggling families. She was strong-willed, outspoken, and deeply rooted in a world Nathan had never bothered to acknowledge. But what made her stand out wasn't just her background. It was the fire in her eyes in the photos, a quiet, unshakable strength. She wasn't someone who would bend easily, and that was exactly why she was perfect. Nathan set up a meeting under the guise of a potential sponsorship for Hope Haven. If money was her driving force, This would be simple. The following evening, Elena walked into the gleaming, glass-walled conference room of Sterling Capital. She wasn't impressed. She had dealt with corporate executives before, men who liked to throw checks at problems so they could sleep better at night. Nathan Sterling was no different. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than an entire year's rent for some of the families she worked with. His confidence was effortless, like he was used to walking into a room and owning it. Elena, however, had spent years standing her ground in places where power meant nothing. She extended a hand. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for reaching out." Nathan took her hand, his grip firm but not overbearing. "Elena Brooks, I've heard impressive things about your organization." Her eyes remained steady. "I'm sure you have." A flicker of amusement crossed Nathan's face. She was sharp. He liked that. They sat across from each other, and Elena immediately launched into her pitch, passionate, precise, no nonsense. She outlined the struggles Hope Haven faced, the families they served, the gaps in funding that were limiting their reach. Nathan listened, or at least pretended to. In truth, he was studying her. The way she spoke, the way she didn't hesitate, the way she didn't need his approval. Finally, she finished. "So, Mr. Sterling, if your company is serious about making an impact, we'd love your support. But if this is just about a tax write-off, don't waste my time." Nathan smiled. Damn, she wasn't just sharp. She was fearless. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make the space between them feel smaller. "I have a different kind of proposal for you, Elena." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, marry me." Silence. Elena stared at him, unblinking. Then she let out a sharp laugh. "Excuse me? I'm offering you a deal." Nathan continued smoothly, as if he hadn't just suggested something outrageous. 6 months. A marriage in name only. In exchange, I'll fund Hope Haven indefinitely. You'll never have to worry about another dollar. Elena leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You think you can buy me?" "I think I can help you," Nathan corrected. "And in return, you help me." Her jaw tightened. "Help you how?" "Let's just say I have my own reasons for needing this arrangement." Elena's mind raced. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She had spent her entire life fighting against men like Nathan Sterling, billionaires who thought they could own the world. But then she thought about Hope Haven, about the mothers who came in, exhausted, begging for a place to sleep, about the kids who did their homework under dim lights because their homes had no electricity. Money could change lives. And right now, this man was offering more money than she could ever raise in a lifetime. She should have said no. She wanted to say no. But instead, she looked Nathan in the eye and said, "I have conditions." Nathan smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Game on." Nathan Sterling was a man who never lost. The bet wasn't just about winning, it was about proving that no situation, no person, was beyond his control. And so, within hours of shaking hands with Marcus, he set his team into motion. His assistant, Emma, discreetly compiled a list of potential candidates, women who were far removed from the world of wealth and power. Nathan flipped through the profiles with mild curiosity. Each name and face nothing more than another business transaction. Then he saw her, Elena Brooks, 35, a former teacher turned social worker, founder of Hope Haven, a nonprofit that provided housing, education, and resources for struggling families. She was strong-willed, outspoken, and deeply rooted in a world Nathan had never bothered to acknowledge. But what made her stand out wasn't just her background. It was the fire in her eyes in the photos, a quiet, unshakable strength. She wasn't someone who would bend easily, and that was exactly why she was perfect. Nathan set up a meeting under the guise of a potential sponsorship for Hope Haven. If money was her driving force, this would be simple. The following evening, Elena walked into the gleaming, glass-walled conference room of Sterling Capital. She wasn't impressed. She had dealt with corporate executives before, men who liked to throw checks at problems so they could sleep better at night. Nathan Sterling was no different. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than an entire year's rent for some of the families she worked with. His confidence was effortless, like he was used to walking into a room and owning it. Elena, however, had spent years standing her ground in places where power meant nothing. She extended a hand. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for reaching out." Nathan took her hand, his grip firm but not overbearing. "Elena Brooks, I've heard impressive things about your organization." Her eyes remained steady. "I'm sure you have." A flicker of amusement crossed Nathan's face. She was sharp. He liked that. They sat across from each other, and Elena immediately launched into her pitch, passionate, precise, no nonsense. She outlined the struggles Hope Haven faced, the families they served, the gaps in funding that were limiting their reach. Nathan listened, or at least pretended to. In truth, he was studying her. The way she spoke, the way she didn't hesitate, the way she didn't need his approval. Finally, she finished. "So, Mr. Sterling, if your company is serious about making an impact, we'd love your support. But if this is just about a tax write-off, don't waste my time." Nathan smiled. Damn, she wasn't just sharp. She was fearless. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make the space between them feel smaller. "I have a different kind of proposal for you, Elena." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, marry me." Silence. Elena stared at him, unblinking. Then she let out a sharp laugh. "Excuse me? I'm offering you a deal." Nathan continued smoothly, as if he hadn't just suggested something outrageous. 6 months. A marriage in name only. In exchange, I'll fund Hope Haven indefinitely. You'll never have to worry about another dollar. Elena leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You think you can buy me?" "I think I can help you," Nathan corrected. "And in return, you help me." Her jaw tightened. "Help you how?" "Let's just say I have my own reasons for needing this arrangement." Elena's mind raced. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She had spent her entire life fighting against men like Nathan Sterling, billionaires who thought they could own the world. But then she thought about Hope Haven, about the mothers who came in, exhausted, begging for a place to sleep, about the kids who did their homework under dim lights because their homes had no electricity. Money could change lives. And right now, this man was offering more money than she could ever raise in a lifetime. She should have said no. She wanted to say no. But instead, she looked Nathan in the eye and said, "I have conditions." Nathan smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Game on. The contract was signed within a week. No elaborate engagement. No romantic gestures, just cold, calculated paperwork. A transaction. Nothing more. Elena had 3 conditions. She kept full control of Hope Haven. Nathan could fund it, but he couldn't interfere. She would live in his penthouse, but in a separate room. This was a business deal, not a real marriage. If she ever felt this arrangement compromised her values, she could walk away, no questions asked. Nathan had never had a woman dictate the terms before. It should have irritated him. Instead, he found himself intrigued. For Elena, stepping into Nathan's world felt like walking onto a stage where she didn't belong. The wedding was small and impersonal. Nathan handled everything, choosing the venue, the rings, even the vows. Elena barely recognized the polished woman in the mirror when she slipped into the simple white dress they had picked for her. When she arrived at the exclusive, private ceremony, she felt completely out of place. Nathan, on the other hand, looked completely in control. This was just another business deal to him. The officiant read through the vows. For better or for worse, Elena wanted to laugh. There was no better or worse here, just terms and conditions. When it was time to seal the deal with a kiss, Nathan leaned in, but Elena turned her cheek at the last second. His lips barely grazed her skin. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. But then, He smirked. He liked a challenge. The penthouse was cold and perfect. Just like Nathan. High ceilings, glass walls, sleek modern furniture, everything screamed power and money. "This is your home now," Nathan said as they entered. Elena dropped her suitcase in the guest room without hesitation. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're really committing to the separate rooms thing?" She turned, meeting his gaze without flinching. That was the deal. His smirk didn't waver. "Suit yourself." For the first few days, they barely saw each other. Nathan had his world, board meetings, power lunches, high-profile deals. Elena had Hope Haven, throwing herself into work as if nothing had changed. But the differences between them became impossible to ignore. A week after the wedding, Nathan demanded that Elena attend a charity gala with him. "It's a fundraiser," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Good networking for you." Elena rolled her eyes. "Oh, you mean parading me around like a trophy wife?" "It's one night," he countered. "Consider it part of the deal." She wanted to refuse, but Hope Haven needed the exposure. So she put on a borrowed dress, pulled her hair into a sleek bun, and let Nathan escort her into a world where she didn't belong. The room was glittering with power, men in tailored suits, women in designer gowns, sipping champagne like it was water. Nathan moved through the crowd effortlessly. This was his kingdom. Elena, on the other hand, felt like an outsider. She tried to engage in polite conversation. But the moment she mentioned her work with the homeless, the smiles became forced. At one point, a socialite turned to her and asked, "So, Elena, how did you and Nathan meet?" Elena sipped her wine, keeping her voice calm. "He offered me a deal I couldn't refuse." The woman laughed, not realizing Elena was dead serious. Nathan overheard. His smirk faltered for the first time. But the real breaking point came when an investor casually remarked, "It's great that Nathan is getting involved in charity. The homeless crisis is so tragic. Thank God for people like us who can do something about it." Elena snapped. She turned to him, her voice sharp but controlled. "The people you're calling tragic are human beings. And they don't need saviors. They need resources, opportunities, and respect. Maybe try listening to them instead of just writing checks." Silence. Nathan exhaled slowly. He should have been furious. She had just humiliated one of his business partners. But instead, he felt something he hadn't in years. Respect. And maybe, just maybe, something else. 2 days later, Elena dragged Nathan into her world. She forced him to come to Hope Haven, the one place where money meant nothing. Nathan arrived in a tailored suit and Italian shoes, looking painfully out of place. The moment he stepped inside, he felt it, the sharp contrast between his pristine world and this one. The walls were cracked. The furniture was secondhand. Volunteers bustled around, sorting donations and handing out meals. Elena introduced him to a young woman holding a sleeping toddler. "This is Anna," she said. "She was kicked out of her apartment last month after losing her job. She's been sleeping in shelters ever since." Anna looked up at Nathan with quiet exhaustion. "I used to clean offices like yours." Nathan felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. A small girl tugged at Elena's dress. "Miss Elena, do we have any more blankets? It's really cold in the shelter." Nathan couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't a place that needed checks thrown at it. Needed real, human effort. For the first time, he realized he had never actually done anything that mattered. That night, back in the penthouse, Nathan sat by the window, staring out at the city. The same city he had owned for years. And for the first time, it felt different. Nathan started showing up at Hope Haven more often. At first, it was just to observe Elena, to figure her out. But then, without realizing it, he started helping, sorting donations, speaking to families. He wasn't just playing a role anymore. Something inside him was changing. But just when he thought he was beginning to understand Elena's world, just when he thought maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about a bet anymore, The truth was about to come crashing down. Nathan had spent his life winning every deal, every negotiation, everhy challenge. But for the first time, he wasn't sure what he was playing for anymore. First, Hope Haven was just a means to an end, a way to convince Elena he was serious. But now, he found himself staying long after he needed to. He started talking to the people there, hearing their stories. He met mothers struggling to keep their children safe, teenagers fighting to break the cycle of poverty, veterans who had been forgotten, and somewhere in between handing out food at the shelter and fixing a broken table. He realized he wasn't pretending anymore. Elena had started to notice the change. Nathan wasn't just showing up at Hope Haven. He was participating. He stopped wearing his expensive suits. He rolled up his sleeves. He sat with the families, listened, and even helped fix a broken heater when the shelter lost power. Confused her, because men like Nathan didn't change. At least, that's what she had always believed. And just when she started thinking, maybe, just maybe, there was something real beneath the arrogance. Beneath the power, the truth came out. It happened at a high-profile fundraising event for Hope Haven, one that Nathan had helped organize. Everything was going smoothly. Donations were pouring in. Elena was exhausted but grateful. And then, Marcus Hale walked in. He strode up to Nathan with a smirk, holding a glass of whiskey like he owned the room. "Hell of a show you're putting on here, Nathan," he said, voice dripping with amusement. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you actually care." Nathan's stomach dropped. Marcus clinked his glass against Nathan's. "Gotta say, I didn't think you'd last this long, but you've played your part well. How much longer before you tell her?" Silence. Elena had been walking past, overhearing everything. She froze. Nathan's jaw clenched. "Marcus, don't." But it was too late. Marcus turned to Elena, amused. "You mean he hasn't told you?" "Oh, sweetheart, this whole thing started as a bet." The room went still. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She turned to Nathan, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burned. "A bet?" Nathan swallowed hard. "Elena, let me explain." But there was nothing to explain, because suddenly, everything made sense. The sudden marriage, the endless funding, the way he had inserted himself into her world like it was a game. Elena's voice was quiet, but sharp. "Tell me it's not true." Nathan couldn't, because it was true. And the worst part? It had started as a bet. But somewhere along the way, it had become real. But Elena didn't know that. Her face hardened, her hands shaking as she stepped back. "I trusted you." Nathan reached for her, desperate. "Elena, No," her voice cut through him like a blade. "I was never your wife. I was never your partner. I was just another deal. Another game for you to win." Nathan felt panic rise in his chest. He had never felt this before. He could fix this. He could talk his way out of anything. But for the first time, his words wouldn't be enough. Because the only thing Elena had ever valued, more than money, more than power, was trust. And he had destroyed it. Elena walked out of the event, out of his life, without looking back. Nathan went after her, but she was already gone. The penthouse felt empty that night. Hope Haven cut all ties with him the next day. For the first time, money couldn't fix what he had broken. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Sterling had lost. But losing her was just the beginning. Nathan Sterling had built his empire on control. Every deal, every acquisition, every decision calculated, precise, his to command. But this was the first time in his life he had no control. Elena was gone. Hope Haven had cut him off. And no matter how many times he replayed that night, no matter how much he wanted to go back and change everything, the truth remained the same. He had betrayed her, and there was no coming back from that. The penthouse had never felt so empty. Nathan found himself waiting for the sound of her voice, the quiet clatter of her coffee mug in the kitchen, the way she would roll her eyes at his arrogance but still hold her ground. But there was nothing, only silence. First, he did what he always did. He threw himself into work, meetings, deals, more money, but none of it mattered. For the first time, winning felt hollow, because for the first time, he wasn't playing for himself anymore. Nathan had every reason to walk away. Hope Haven had made it clear they didn't want his money. They didn't want him, but he found himself going back anyway. Not because he thought it would fix things. Not because he thought Elena would forgive him, but because he needed to understand. For the first time in his life, Nathan Sterling showed up not as a billionaire, but as a man trying to do something real. First, the volunteers ignored him. Some openly resented him. And Nathan didn't blame them. He didn't push. He didn't try to prove himself. He just worked, scrubbing floors, hauling boxes of supplies, listening. It was humbling. It was uncomfortable. But for the first time, Nathan didn't care about being uncomfortable, because he finally understood why Elena fought for these people, why she never gave up, and why he had never truly earned her respect. Weeks passed. Nathan had stopped expecting her to come back. He didn't deserve her forgiveness. But one night, sitting alone in his penthouse, he picked up a pen and wrote the one thing he had never said out loud. Elena, I spent my life believing power meant control. That money solved everything. That winning was the only thing that mattered. Then I met you, and for the first time, I learned what it felt like to lose. I didn't just lose the bet. I lost you, and that's the only thing I regret. You once told me that people don't need saviors, that they need someone who shows up and stays. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you at all. But I needed you to know I finally understand. I hope one day, when you think of me, it's not as the man who betrayed you, but as the man who finally learned how to be better. Nathan. But he sent it anyway, because for the first time, this wasn't about winning. It was about becoming the kind of man she had believed he could be, even if she never came back. Nathan didn't expect a response. Days passed, then weeks, then months. No reply, no calls, no sign of her. And yet, he didn't stop showing up. At Hope Haven, he became just another volunteer, one who worked in the background, who didn't demand attention, who didn't use his money to make things easier. For the first time, Nathan Sterling was doing something that didn't benefit him. And for the first time, he felt whole. It happened on a cold autumn evening. Nathan was unloading food supplies at the shelter when he heard a voice behind him, still playing at being a good man. Nathan? His heart stopped. He turned around. Elena. She stood there, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. She looked the same, fierce, stubborn, unshaken. But something had changed. Nathan swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a box. I didn't think I'd see you again. Elena raised an eyebrow. I didn't think I'd want to see you again. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. And then, she sighed. I got your letter. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. And? Elena studied him for a long moment. You're different, she said finally. Nathan let out a quiet breath. I had to be. Elena tilted her head. Did you? Though? You could have walked away. You had no reason to stay. Nathan met her gaze. You were my reason, Elena. And when I lost you, I realized I needed a new one. Hope Haven. These people, they gave me that. For the first time, her expression softened. And for the first time, Nathan wasn't looking for forgiveness, only the chance to prove he wasn't the same man she left. Elena didn't forgive easily, and Nathan didn't expect her to. But over the next few weeks, something shifted. She saw him, not as the billionaire who had lied to her, but as the man who was trying. He still made mistakes. He still had moments where his old arrogance surfaced. But he was learning, and he never stopped showing up. One evening, as they finished stacking food supplies, Nathan turned to her. I don't want anything from you, Elena, he said. I just want you to know. If you ever need me, I'll be here. Elena hesitated. Then, for the first time since she walked away, she gave him a small, genuine smile. We'll see, Nathan. For the first time, They weren't enemies. They weren't pretending. They weren't playing a game. And for the first time, Nathan Sterling didn't care about winning. Because this time, it wasn't about victory. It was about becoming a man worthy of her trust. And that was worth more than any deal he had ever made. 1 year had passed since the night Elena walked away. Nathan Sterling was no longer the man he used to be. The sharp-edged billionaire who once saw the world as a game had been stripped away, layer by layer. What remained was a man who had learned how to listen, how to serve, how to care. And yet, there was still one thing missing. Elena. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. The sky painted with hues of orange and gold. The newest Hope Haven Center was opening, an expansion Nathan had quietly funded but never taken credit for. Families gathered, volunteers bustled around, and the air buzzed with excitement. Nathan stood at the entrance, hands in his pockets, watching from a distance. Then, he saw her. Elena moved through the crowd effortlessly, guiding children, thanking donors, making sure everything ran smoothly. She looked stronger than ever, more radiant than ever, and for the first time, she finally saw him, not as the man who had deceived her, not as the billionaire who once played with her life, but as the man who had changed. Elena approached him, stopping just a few feet away. "I heard this place had a mysterious investor," she said, arms crossed. Turns out it wasn't so mysterious after all. Nathan gave a small smile. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," she said softly. Silence stretched between them. Then, she took a breath. "You stayed." Nathan's chest tightened. "I told you I would. I thought you would get tired of it." "I thought so too," he admitted. "But I didn't." Elena studied him carefully, as if searching for any trace of the man he used to be. "Why, Nathan?" she asked, her voice quieter. His gaze was steady. "Because for the first time in my life, I found something that wasn't about power or winning, and I wasn't willing to lose it." She exhaled, shaking her head with a small, reluctant smile. "You really have changed." Nathan gave a soft chuckle. "It took a hell of a teacher." Something flickered in her eyes. For the first time, there was no anger, no hurt, no walls between them. Nathan could have asked for her back. He could have pushed, tried to convince her that they deserved another chance. But he didn't, because this time, it had to be her choice. So instead, he took a slow breath and said, "I'll wait for you, Elena, however long it takes." Elena held his gaze. Then, she smiled a real, genuine smile, and she closed the distance between them. Slowly, carefully, she reached for his hand. "I think you've waited long enough," she murmured. Nathan barely had a second to react before she leaned in and kissed him. Soft, slow, but undeniably real. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still things to work through, wounds that hadn't fully healed. But for the first time, they weren't on opposite sides anymore. For the first time, they were choosing each other not because of a deal, not because of a bet, but because it was real. And that was worth everything. A few months later, they walked hand in hand through Hope Haven, side by side, not as business partners, not as a contract-bound couple, but as something more, as two people who had fought their way back to each other. Nathan paused, watching the children play, the volunteers working, the life buzzing around them. Then, he turned to Elena with a smirk. "So, do I officially get my redemption now?" Elena laughed, shaking her head. "Nathan, redemption isn't something you win." "Then what is it?" She squeezed his hand. "It's something you choose, every single day." Nathan Sterling smiled. For the first time in his life, he had finally won something that truly mattered, and he would never take it for granted again.